a sacred mountain shrouded in mystery for centuries. Resting on the brink of revelation, Mount Sinai, the holy mountain where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, thought for centuries to be on the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. Could it be we've been wrong all this time? Biblical explorer Bob Cornuke and his companion Larry Williams embark on a journey that will change their lives forever, finding evidence leading to what could be the real Mount Sinai. Fascinating and remarkable, says National Geographic Television. The most likely site for Mount Sinai, says Newsweek, and Coach Bill McCartney said it was the most powerful thing I've ever seen. The search for the real Mount Sinai.
The fate of the lost Ark of the Covenant is perhaps the greatest mystery of all time. The gold box built to carry the Holy 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, the powerful vessel God used to level mountains, lay waste to entire cities, and destroy armies, the holy relic with unspeakable power, suddenly and mysteriously disappears from recorded history. For hundreds of years, explorers and archaeologists have given their lives to find the Ark, and nations, kings, and rulers have all sought to possess it for themselves. Some believe that if it could be found, they could possess its great power, and others believe that if it was discovered, it would set in motion a chain of prophetic events that would bring about the end of the world. Journey with us on an expedition that unearths startling new information on the exact location of the Ark. We will take you to a mysterious stone city and to an elusive protected island inhabited only by monks. And you'll see the guardian of the Ark, believed to be charged by God to protect it till the day he dies. Like a detective story, history opens up its hidden secrets to reveal a stunning trail of evidence that unlocks an age-old mystery.
It began for me by accident.
Graham Hancock is a respected journalist and a best-selling author. As a correspondent for The Economist, he was assigned to the region of East Africa where his work regularly took him to Ethiopia. There he stumbled on a legend that would forever change his life.
And I started hearing stories about a tradition concerning the Ark of the Covenant. And my curiosity was provoked, and I started to investigate the subject. And this investigation just drew me on over the years into a total absorption with a single question: does Ethiopia have the Ark of the Covenant?
He documented his findings in his best-selling book, The Sign and the Seal.
I got a copy of The Sign and the Seal by Graham Hancock, and it presented a very unique theory. And as I researched this book, I saw that it pointed to Ethiopia as a very strong candidate.
Bob Cornuke is the president of the Bible Archaeology Search and Exploration Institute. His mission is to investigate archaeological discoveries and sites around the world that confirm and support the claims of the Bible. His work on the location of the real Mount Sinai grabbed the interest of scholars and made news headlines worldwide. So when Cornuke heard of the possibility that the Ark could still exist today, he couldn't dismiss it.
So I had to go search for this object. I assembled a team, we went to Ethiopia, and we searched for the mysterious Ark of the Covenant.
Our search begins on the other side of the world, in Ethiopia. Set in the mountainous region of the continent lies the oldest Christian nation in Africa. Isolated in its highlands sits the remote, dusty village of Axum. This village has remained virtually untouched by the outside world for thousands of years, and its people are gracious and hospitable. Theirs is a village much like any of the others in this part of Africa, except for one thing. They believe that they possess the most holy relic on earth, the Ark of the Covenant.
This village is very remote, it's very archaic, and it's like going back thousands of years in time.
Scholars in general, biblical scholars, historians, academics, don't feel that there's any merit to the Ethiopian claim. I should add that this is largely people who've never been to Ethiopia themselves and really have no idea what the claim is based on, but there's just a feeling on the part of academics that such an important object as the Ark of the Covenant couldn't possibly have found its way to this remote corner of Africa.
Those that would doubt the theory of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia have not been in Ethiopia and seen the people worship this object. They are committed. There's over 50 million people that believe that the Ark of the Covenant is there. This isn't just some loose legend that just sprung or came about. I think it has to have some basis in history, because these people have a firm belief that the Ark of the Covenant is there.
But why do these villagers believe this? Is it only myth, or is there any truth to their claim? Their legends speak of one of their most famous rulers, the Queen of Sheba, whose beauty captured the heart of the Israelite King Solomon himself. They had a son named Menelik, who, according to their tradition, stole the ark and returned it as a gift to his mother in Axum.
There's huge problems with this tradition, one of the biggest being that the city of Axum did not exist in the time of Solomon. It did not exist. The archaeology of the site is very, very clear. It's a city that started to be built up from about the 2nd century before Christ, certainly not in the 10th century before Christ. And it was natural of academics to dismiss this story.
But the people of Ethiopia don't dismiss it. In fact, they not only believe the Ark rests there today, but they honor its sacred demands and give their lives in serving this holy object. This entire culture reveres its power, and its worship is central to their faith.
They worship daily. They migrate from miles around and come every day to this temple, and they give their lives in worship to what they believe to be the Ark of the Covenant. I could see the people wrapped in their white robes, journeying and migrating to the chapel at St. Mary's of Zion, where they would worship. They follow a very old style of Orthodox Christianity.
This strange country, the highlands of Africa, which practices an amazingly Old Testament form of religion, both in terms of Christianity and, oddly enough, Judaism, because there has been a traditional Judaic presence in Ethiopia for a very long time, that this country claims to possess the Ark of the Covenant. Every single church in Ethiopia, there's more than 20,000 of them, contains a replica of the Ark of the Covenant in its Holy of Holies. And these replicas are so important that if they're removed from the church, then the church is considered to be deconsecrated.
The priest, covered by the umbrella, has just been inside the Holy of Holies in a church containing only a replica of the Ark. Even a replica is thought to be so holy that men gather around to be touched and blessed by him.
How do we account for this? What I think has happened is this. Ethiopia does possess the Ark of the Covenant, but it didn't get to Ethiopia in the way that the traditional story has it. It came much later by a totally different and absolutely reasonable historical route, and it eventually found its way to Axel.
Jerusalem, considered by millions to be the holiest city on earth, politically unstable and religiously volatile, this ancient city continues to this day to be a source of much intrigue. The magnificent Temple of King Solomon was built here nearly 3,000 years ago. It was arrayed like no other structure on earth, and was central to the worship life of Israel. Now little of its former glory remains. This excavated western wall is one of its last remnants. Known as the Wailing Wall, it attracts Jews from all over the world to offer prayers for a rebuilt temple and a restored way of life. Thousands of prayers are offered on tiny pieces of paper and are placed in this 3,000-year-old wall. They testify to a nation longing to return to worship in the ancient temple and to a hope of a new temple to be built on this holy site. Now, where Solomon's great temple once stood, there rests the Mosque of Omar, the third most holy site in all Islam. This rare footage, gained by special permission, shows its elaborate architecture and imposing design. But below the dome lies the real mystery. This rock was once the highest point in Old Jerusalem. It was once the very floor of Solomon's temple, and in its core was a room called the Holy of Holies. This room was the center of the temple, only accessible by the high priest. In this room, and some say on this very rock, sat the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. According to the Bible, this was the last recorded location of the Ark.
The focal point in the Holy of Holies really was the Ark of the Covenant. But the focal point of the Ark of the Covenant was the mercy seat, that flat spot on top of the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. We know it was the focal point of the Ark of the Covenant because by God's own instructions, that was the very spot, the very place where the cherubim were to focus their gaze, the cherubim that were represented on top of the Ark of the Covenant.
The Bible chronicles that the Ark of the Covenant was built at Mount Sinai, the holy mountain where God descended to give Moses the 10 Commandments. It was a wooden box about 4 feet long, 2 feet high, and 2 feet wide. The entire box was covered, inside and out, with pure gold. The lid was a special thick slab of gold called the mercy seat and was crowned by the powerful figures of 2 winged angels called the cherubim. When its construction was complete, it would house the 10 Commandments given to Moses on the top of Mount Sinai, and between the golden cherubim, God's very power would dwell.
And it wasn't until blood was sprinkled by the high priest on the mercy seat, on that spot on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, that God's wrath was satisfied by the blood of a substitute. It was an extremely grave operation. The high priest had to be pure. He didn't dare go in without a rope tied around him that his body might be dragged out should he be struck dead in the presence of the Lord. But God in His grace and His mercy provided this means within the law of His wrath being propitiated, being satisfied by blood being sprinkled over the law or above the law.
This holy object was so powerful, the Bible records, that it parted the waters of a mighty river, destroyed enemy armies, and if not handled according to God's holy specifications, destroyed those who touched it or who looked upon it. For the high priests of Israel, meeting God's presence at the Ark of the Covenant to atone for sin was central to Israel's worship. Today, Jerusalem is a city that has been thoroughly excavated. As Cornuke walked around the old city of Jerusalem, the remains testified to the hundreds of years of archaeological research. It seemed unlikely that the Ark could still be here. Throughout history, the Ark of the Covenant has been sought after by archaeologists, adventurers, rulers, and kings. Numerous theories as to its whereabouts have surfaced.
One theory concerns the pharaoh Shishak, who certainly led an army into the Holy Land soon after the time of Solomon. And it's been suggested that he may have taken the Ark and brought it back to Egypt. And in fact, that's the basis of the scenario in the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark movie.
Some believe that it was destroyed by the Babylonians when they invaded Jerusalem. The Bible records the detailed manifests of what was stolen from Israel. Items like knives, door hinges, and lamps are listed. But the most important item, the Ark of the Covenant, is never mentioned.
Another theory is that it was taken under the Temple Mount somewhere and secreted away because of the extensive network of tunnels and quarry tunnels underneath the Temple Mount. In fact, just within the last few years, a particular rabbi in Jerusalem was caught periodically digging under the Temple Mount toward the Holy of Holies, which would be under, of course, the Dome of the Rock Mosque. And his little workings there were all cemented up and safeguarded because it would have caused just a huge international political incident for him to continue.
There have been many people that have claimed to have seen the Ark of the Covenant, some of them underneath the Temple Mount. Others have claimed that it's in the area of Mount Nebo. But none of these have been substantiated, and none of them, I think, are credible.
We need to require evidence. We need to require a sound mind, a level head.
Here at the Wailing Wall, we see a bar mitzvah of a group of Ethiopian boys. Unique because they are Jewish Ethiopians called Falashas, or Beta Israel. After a major exodus to Israel in a special airlift called Operation Moses in 1989, all remaining Falashas left Ethiopia. Their existence is physical proof that an ancient Jewish community existed in Ethiopia. Their origins remain a complete mystery.
We're doing a documentary.
Dr. Sholva Weil is a local scholar and expert on the black Ethiopian Jews. She met with Bob Cornuke at the Hebrew University to discuss them.
And here in Israel there are about 65, not about, there are exactly 65,000 Jews of Ethiopian origin living in Israel today. And there's one theory that the Ethiopian Jews are simply descendants of Jews who lived in Egypt and remained there, and then years later wandered further south through Nubia and got to Ethiopia.
Bob asked Dr. Weil about the African claim that they have possessed the Ark of the Covenant for some time in Aksum, Ethiopia.
Jews all over the world, and other religions too, it's not just Jews, relate to the Ark of the Covenant as a sacred item. There is definitely a very strong legend that Ethiopian Christians possess the Ark of the Covenant.
The Temple Institute is a sect of Jews intent on seeing the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Cornuke wondered if they could shed some light on the Ark's whereabouts.
We have no real concrete information. And I can't speculate because I can give you stories, historically speaking, that people have written about and talked about. But to be concrete, to be 100%, comfortable with of giving you honest proof, black and white, it's not available.
See, what I needed to find was a viable workable historical route that could have brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, and that could have brought it to Axum at a time when Axum did exist.
Hancock delved into his research. Studying the biblical text and examining Jewish tradition, he came upon a particularly troubling and violent time in Israel's history, one that may have led to the Ark being removed for safekeeping.
Around 650 BC, a monarch had sat on the throne of Israel, Manasseh, who was completely different from all of his predecessors. In fact, he's reviled in the Bible for having abandoned the traditional Judaic faith and for having installed a pagan idol in the Holy of Holies of the temple, the ultimate abomination, an Asherah, a pagan idol in the Holy of Holies.
This would have infuriated the loyal priests. He actually practiced sorcery and wizardry, even sacrificed his son in the temple. The loyal priests wouldn't have allowed this to happen if the Ark of the Covenant was there.
And I talked to many biblical scholars about this matter, and they all agreed that for those priests who were loyal to the traditional ancient religion of Judaism, it would have been completely unacceptable and impossible for the Ark of the Covenant to remain in a Holy of Holies that had been defiled by the presence of a pagan idol, and that there would have been a very powerful motive for the Ark's priesthood to remove the Ark of the Covenant at that time.
It would have been taken out to a safe place, somewhere else, away from Jerusalem, away from this king who is evil and wicked.
But where was the Ark taken? Graham's research uncovered an extraordinary development, evidence of a site on the Nile River in Egypt, seemingly designed to house the Ark of the Covenant.
A Jewish temple was built outside of Jerusalem during the First Temple period. Now this is an extraordinarily important development, because during the First Temple period there would seem to be no justification whatsoever for the construction of a temple anywhere outside of Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, if you look at the biblical texts on this, you'll find that the rationale and the reason for the construction of the temple is stated very, very clearly of the temple in Jerusalem, that it was built as an house of rest for the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. That's why the temple was built. Why in that period is a Jewish temple built on the island of Elephantine in Upper Egypt near the town of Aswan in the middle of the Nile? Why should this happen? What can explain it?
Could this be where the priests fleeing Manasseh's reign of terror had gone with the Ark of the Covenant? With Israel in defilement, they may have taken the Ark down the Nile River, seeking a safe place for it to rest.
So I began to realize that it might not have been a coincidence at all that a Jewish temple suddenly appeared way off in Egypt on the island of Elephantine. This temple is built, and further investigation showed that it had been built by priests fleeing the reign of Manasseh.
Ladies and gentlemen, approaching Cairo Airport. Kindly request to fasten the seatbelts. Thank you.
Well, then we traveled south into Egypt, to Aswan, where Elephantine Island is located on the Nile River. It is a very small island. It's not a large island. It was a trading post in ancient times with trade between Egypt and Ethiopia, and it was strategically located right on the border of Egypt and Ethiopia. It's a very isolated island on the Nile River. They have right now a museum there. They have ancient ruins, and in these ancient ruins they say that they have found a temple that would have housed the Ark of the Covenant.
Elephantine is an island whose ruins have been a curiosity to archaeologists since the late 1800s. As Bob surveyed the island, it was clear that a significant culture dwelt here at one time. But was there a Jewish temple on this island? And could the Ark of the Covenant have come here? Bob was curious to know more and met with Dr. Atif Hanna, who has personally been involved in studying the archaeology of Elephantine for the last 20 years.
And he advised us that they had found writings that indicated that the Ark of the Covenant actually was there and rested in this temple.
A telling discovery was also made here: papyri and pottery shards used for ancient letter writing that had been passed between here and Jerusalem, asking for instructions on how to properly perform the blood sacrifice, a ceremony thought to be unthinkable outside of Jerusalem, and according to the book of Deuteronomy, against Hebrew law. If the Ark came here, could it still be hidden? If not, what forces drove it from here, and what happened to the Jewish temple and the Hebrew priests who once lived here?
It is again a well-attested historical fact that that temple was destroyed, burnt down in around 410 BC.
But why was this temple destroyed? And by whom? Cornuke examined further and noticed that the Jewish remains weren't the only remnants on Elephantine. After all, this island is deep in the Egyptian desert that once held the Jews in slavery. Hieroglyphs and Egyptian symbols of pagan idols alongside Hebrew worship symbols pointed to an inevitable conflict. Dr. Hanna pointed to ruins of a Jewish colony that had flourished here. There was a Jewish temple with the same dimensions as Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and nearby a large number of homes. But these Hebrews were in close proximity to a large Egyptian temple, also on Elephantine.
And as we explored and researched on this island, we found inscribed on the granite blocks and on the old ancient walls these ram gods, these Egyptian ram gods. And we found that the rams were worshipped by the Egyptians. And there could have been great conflict with the Egyptians because the Egyptians worshipped the ram god and the Hebrews sacrificed the ram. This would have caused a conflict between the two groups, possibly resulting in the destruction of the temple and them leaving the island altogether.
Yeah, there are conflicts between the Jewish and Egyptian because the Jewish are sacrificed by a ram, and Egyptian are adoration or worship the ram.
There's no evidence that the Jewish community was massacred or murdered at Elephantine. What happens is they just vanish completely from history, and we never again learn as to what happened to them.
This conflict led to the temple being destroyed, and the Ark once again mysteriously disappears. Bob again spoke with Dr. Hanna and was surprised to learn what he believed happened.
The Ark of Covenant moved from Jerusalem at Manasseh Kings and come at Elephantine Island. The Ark of Covenant here, I think it will be remained for some times. Yes, for keeping at the Jewish temple. At the 3rd century before Christ, with some of Jewish community which we here are moved to south to keep it, to Abyssinia or Ethiopia in the south. That the Ark of Covenant are still until now in that area.
Really? Yeah. They could not flee north through a hostile Egypt, so they fled south, following the Nile River system, down through the Sudan.
That is very special things for all the world. If it's that still until now, we hope Ethiopian tell us and published something about that.
Dr. Hanna obviously took the powerful Ark of the Covenant very seriously. Yes. He knew it was nothing to be trifled with.
I think it is a great secret. It is too much power. Too much power.
So the Ark once again headed south, transported for safekeeping, on the mighty Nile River.
And that Nile river system leads ultimately to one of the two sources of the Nile. One, of course, is in Uganda. The other source of the Nile, the Blue Nile, where most of the Nile's water comes from, is in Lake Tana in the highlands of Ethiopia.
This is the spectacular Blue Nile Falls. And directly above it is one of Africa's largest lakes, Lake Tana.
So Africa.
Because I also did extensive research work on Lake Tana. And this is where the pace of the investigation began to really speed up. And I found a most curious, remote island called Tana Kirkos.
Very difficult to get to this island, and in fact it takes a 3.5-hour boat ride across Lake Tana, which is about 90 miles across. It's one of the larger lakes in Africa. Tana Kirkos is considered by the Ethiopians to be a holy island.
This island is considered to be one of Ethiopia's most protected holy sites. Only about a mile long, this narrow island is covered with lush vegetation and surrounded by towering cliffs. Set in the middle of Lake Tana, it is completely restricted from visitors. Few were allowed to visit, and only men were welcome. Bob wondered what clues Tana Kirkos held and what he would find there.
Arrived at this island, we were met by these monks that were dressed in literally rags and had no shoes, and they lived as they did thousands of years ago. They ground their own corn, they lived in thatch huts, and we were like stepping back into time. When you come to the island, you live there for your entire life. They recruit from the villages around, and they get young boys that are worthy, and their parents bring them and offer them to live and worship at this holy place, Lake Tana.
These monks were a mystery. Shy and withdrawn, it was apparent they were uncomfortable with visitors. Is it possible they were once the Ark's caretakers? Did these holy men possess secrets about the Ark of the Covenant?
And the monks told me a very detailed variant tradition of the Ark of the Covenant story. But they said when the Ark was brought from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, it wasn't first brought to Exum, it was first brought to their island, to the island of Tana Kirkos, and it remained a cult object there for hundreds of years.
We have just arrived on Tana Kirkos Island. It is legend by the Ethiopians that the Ark of the Covenant rested here on this holy island, and that it was placed in a tent on this very rock ledge.
Could the Ark have rested on this rock surface overlooking Lake Tana for 800 years, as the monks have claimed? A unique altar of rocks still remained on the site. Covered by moss, this altar was visibly weathered and ancient. Carved into these rocks, there is a curious hollowed-out bowl. As Cornuke spent time with the monks, he seemed to gain their trust. He began to hear further stories from them about the Ark.
That they claimed that people came by the thousands around this island to worship the Ark of the Covenant, and the priest would dip the horse's tail into the blood from the granite blocks and then sprinkle it on the Ark and then on the people.
This blood was part of a traditional Jewish ceremony. The ancient bowl would hold the blood of the sacrificial animal killed for the atonement ceremony. This sacred site had never been visited by archaeologists, and as Bob surveyed the site, his investigative instincts took over. He began to dig.
That's a due south, exactly along the line.
With his team, Cornuke worked to measure and document the site. Then Cornuke discovered some holes carved deep into the rock.
We are told from the monks that the Ark of the Covenant rested on this very spot below my feet. And and that it rested in a tent called the tabernacle. And so we looked and we found evidence that there was actually a tent on this spot at one time. We found evidence of socket holes. You can see that they carved out of this stone the round hole that would have been the socket that holds the tent placements. And we found these in a north-south direction and an east-west direction. And we found one 13 feet this way, and we walked directly over in an east-west direction, and we found one right here 13 feet away from the other socket placement. And we found that these socket holes fit roughly with what the description was given in the Bible for the size of the tabernacle.
If the tabernacle tent which housed the Ark of the Covenant actually rested on these rocks, this would be a startling and significant discovery. It would validate an historical route, bringing the Ark to Ethiopia. The monks then offered to show Bob some of their ancient relics. This beautiful old tapestry painting was impressive, but no one was prepared for what the monks brought out next.
The monks said that they had implements with them from Solomon's temple. I said, why would you still have these implements from Solomon's temple? Wouldn't they have gone to Axum with the Ark of the Covenant?
And they said to me, we were Jews at that time. Later, our community became Christians. Finally, the first Christian king of Ethiopia, he came with his army from Axum to our island, and he stole the Ark of the Covenant from us, and he took it to Axum and he put it there.
So they did not need these items to be taken with them to Axum. They were actually abandoned and left with the monks on Tanakirkos. Okay, the monks have brought this bronze, very corroded bowl out. They call this a gomer. They say that they put blood in this during the blood sacrifices, and that someone would stir it to keep the blood from coagulating. It was used in the blood sacrificial services. They tell me that this bowl came from Solomon's temple. If that's true, this would be the only known implement from Solomon's temple to exist in the world today that can be verifiable.
The monks brought out a pair of ancient meat forks and said they came from Solomon's temple with the Ark. The monks explained that these meat forks were used to put large pieces of meat on the fire in the burnt offering sacrifice. Each fork was topped with a budding almond symbol, one Bob had seen at other sites in Ethiopia.
And this stand is extremely old, very, very heavy. This gomer fits on the top of this stand like this. You can see it's bent from time and wear and just sheer fatigue. But they claim when they became Christian that they did not need these implements any longer because they were involving the blood sacrifice. So with Jesus Christ offering the blood of sacrifice, these were no longer needed in their ceremonies. So they were left with the monks.
Where did they get them? They had virtually no metal on the island and no ability to manufacture these items, and plus the items were extremely old in antiquity. So where did these implements come from? These monks said that I was the first one to be shown these implements, because if these ever proved to be articles that were from Solomon's temple, these photographs will be the only ones in existence to date. And I felt it was an extreme honor to be a part of this.
The obsession with finding the Ark of the Covenant has been around for centuries. In 1099 AD, a highly educated and rather mysterious sect took a special interest in finding and possessing it.
A very curious group of European knights at the time of the Crusades, the Knights Templar, who were called the Knights Templar because their headquarters was actually on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, had taken a very special interest in the Ark of the Covenant.
And it is believed that they searched for holy objects, that their quest was to find these objects that were very significant in Christian history. Obviously, they would have been searching for the Ark of the Covenant.
The background to their presence in Jerusalem is really rather a mysterious one. And it seems that they functioned somewhat like archaeologists in Jerusalem. They actually dug tunnels underneath the Temple Mount. They excavated the Temple Mount. They were looking for something.
And some attribute their knowledge and their building skills to building the Gothic churches that we find in France and throughout Europe today.
Now in Chartres Cathedral in France, we find a very curious tableau on the north porch. We find an image of the Queen of Sheba set in an African context. There's an African figure at her feet, which seems to suggest a knowledge of the Ethiopian claim. And we find an image of the Ark of the Covenant on a pillar being led as though it were in the direction of the Queen of Sheba, and underneath an inscription saying, "Here is hidden the Ark of the Covenant." The curious thing is that at exactly the time that the Templars were in Jerusalem, an exiled Ethiopian prince was also in Jerusalem, and his name was Lalibela. And he rather miraculously retook his kingdom, went back to Ethiopia and became king of Ethiopia, and then built a group of the most amazing churches that exist anywhere on the face of the earth, carved out of solid rock in the highlands of Ethiopia, at the city that now bears his name, Lalibela.
These monolithic stone churches are nothing short of amazing. Rising as a testament to great architecture and engineering, they are carved out of a mountain of solid granite.
When we arrived at Lalibela, it was one of the most amazing and mysterious places I have ever seen. How were these immense stone churches carved out of one piece of stone? It's a mystery even today.
Connecting these churches is a unique underground labyrinth of tunnels and narrow passageways with offset crypts, grottos, and galleries. This place is as ethereal as it is beautiful.
The characteristic form of architecture of Lalibela, these rock-hewn churches which are literally cut out of the solid rock, it creates an otherworldly feeling when you go there. And it's almost like stepping through a window back into a lost world where anything is possible. Anything is possible, even the presence of the Ark of the Covenant. You suddenly realize when you go to Lalibela that the Ethiopians are connected to the past in a way that we in the West can hardly even imagine today.
It is not uncommon to find monks here, lifting their prayers to God as they have for centuries.
How did Lalibela return after exile from all those years and immediately overthrow his brother that controlled the throne, and then immediately start building these stone churches in 1185?
I began to wonder whether there might have been some involvement of the Knights Templar in this story, particularly since there are traditions that white men were involved in the construction of those churches.
This pillar in the center of one of Lalibela's largest stone churches may contain the ancient secrets of Lalibela's construction. It is completely wrapped in a very old shroud of cloth. Said to be hiding an ancient inscription written by King Lalibela himself, it most likely holds the key to how the churches were really constructed. Its secret inscriptions are said to record that the city was built in only 24 years by white men. But its cryptic writings are guarded carefully by temple priests. Even one of Cornuke's crew was driven away by a temple priest and warned when he sought to touch it. What mystery could this pillar reveal?
The tales that are told about the construction of Lalibela, in my view, fit perfectly with the notion of a group of builders who come to Lalibela, who have very advanced building techniques at their disposal, and who apply those techniques to the construction of the churches. Later it seems that the work has been done by angels or supernatural beings.
If the Crusaders and the sect of Knights Templar left Jerusalem to build Lalibella's great city, they would have left their remaining forces in Jerusalem vulnerable to attack.
Then we find that Crusaders were overrun by Muslim forces and had to leave the temple in Jerusalem. Was it that their forces were fragmented, that they all migrated to Ethiopia to build these churches, that they went there because Lalibela enticed them by saying, I have the Ark of the Covenant?
There's an enormous amount of circumstantial material which suggests that this rather secretive group of warrior knights may have been present in Ethiopia, may even have gone there to look for the Ark of the Covenant after their search in Jerusalem proved fruitless.
But we found inscribed all over these huge rock-hewn churches signs that the Knights Templar were there.
There are a number of Templar mementos around Lalibela. The repetition of the Templar cross, and you see this particularly in the Church of St. Mary at Lalibela. An image of Jerusalem is also found painted inside the same church with a Christian cross above the dome. There are many things to suggest that there was a curious, secretive foreign presence in Lalibela.
We're in the ancient stone church of St. Mary's, and above me is a very unusual symbol. It is the Star of David with a red cross in the middle. This red cross could possibly be from the Knights Templars that came here to carve these magnificent stone churches. This ancient stone wall here has an interesting painting on it. It looks like this is a sword, European in style. It would be very interesting to find out exactly what this could be dated to. And up above here we have what appear to be white men coming with a white cross on a signa. And it'd be interesting to find out exactly what that symbolizes also. These are the ancient rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, believed to have been carved at the end of the 11th century. And this symbol up here symbolizes the second Jerusalem according to the Ethiopians. And if this is true, it's very interesting because this could be the place that they carved out of stone to house the Ark of the Covenant.
Well, the city is a sort of replica or model of the Holy Land, of Israel. It has a river Jordan running through it.
They have a Golgotha, the Mount of Olives. All these indications that this is a second Jerusalem, the second location of where the Ark of the Covenant should be housed.
It's dedicated to representing the Holy City there in Ethiopia.
In this stone cavern we find these bones. We're told that they're 800 years old and that they're Egyptian. We're told that they came here seeking the second Jerusalem. The big question is, why did they come to this ancient city of Lalibela? Right in front of us was this immense moat that protected this stone church that rose from this foundation. And we realized then that it was probably an immense, elaborate system of protection to protect whatever it would be inside these churches. And as we left the amazing city of Lalibela, we thought it didn't appear that the Ark of the Covenant ever made it there at all.
Suddenly, all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle fit together. We have strong evidence that the Ark is gone from Jerusalem before the Babylonian invasion. We have a Jewish temple built hundreds of miles to the south on the island of Elephantine in Egypt with the same dimensions as Solomon's temple. 200 years later, that temple is destroyed, And at more or less exactly the same time, we start hearing of a tradition of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia and on this island of Tana Kirkos on Lake Tana. And the monks there saying that they had the Ark of the Covenant on their island for 800 years before the Ethiopian Christian king came and took it to Axum is the final piece of the puzzle.
So Cornuke made his way back to Axum, Ethiopia, to visit the complex where the Ark of the Covenant is said to be housed today. Bob met with the senior monks, who explained.
When I met the chief priests and the deacons in Axum, I formed a relationship and we started a dialogue, and then I started to visit them daily. And
of the Ark of the Covenant, the last resting of the Ark of the Covenant is in Axum.
This is the building the Ethiopians say is the final resting place of the Holy Ark of the Covenant. A small building. This tiny sanctuary chapel is the very center of spiritual life in Ethiopia. Worshippers gather around the building to pray, knowing that they can never set their eyes on its holy contents, because they believe they will be struck dead by God's holy presence.
The structure was surrounded by a fence, a high metal fence with pointed tips to keep people from going inside, and it seems as if they want to protect this object for a long time. At one time, Axum was a mighty kingdom. It was the capital of a great kingdom, and we can see the monuments there today that are just lying about as testimony to this great civilization.
This enormous rock-hewn pillar, or stele, was once the largest piece of rock ever quarried on Earth. It is part of the ruins of old Axum, which testify to the powerful dynasty and civilization that once was the Axumite Empire. Nearby, Cornuke examined the foundation ruins of an old temple. Built in the 4th century at the conversion of the Axumite kingdom to Christianity, it was the original church structure said to have housed the Ark of the Covenant. 1,200 years later, in 1535, it was razed to the ground by the fanatical Muslim invader Ahmed Graham, and the Ark had to be removed and hidden to keep it safe.
I'm finding these pottery shards here that are in this ancient footing and foundation stones of the original sanctuary, where it's believed that the Ark of the Covenant rested 1,600 years ago when it was brought here by King Izana.
Cornuke began his search and investigation of Axum and the surrounding areas. His first stop was a ruin with a recently discovered ancient stone monument, retelling Axum's great history as a powerful dynasty. Cornuke descended the steps into the underground palace and treasury of Emperor Caleb, a powerful Christian ruler who ruled from 514 to 542 AD. Christianity had come to Axum.
This is King Caleb's palace, so we know that Christianity had an influence at least 600 AD.
Evidence was everywhere of an ancient Christian presence. These walls were decorated with small crosses, further testifying to Axum's strong Christian heritage. Bob wondered if these ancient Christian believers could have possessed the Ark even back then. One eyewitness account by a 13th century Armenian geographer, Abu Salih, spoke of the Ark being carried in Axum by men who were, quote, white and red in complexion with red hair. Could they have been the Knights Templar who also carved these crosses? Bob had heard of a unique carving not far out of town, a carving of a lion and with it a Templar cross. This possibly carved by the mysterious knights themselves. Bob wanted to see for himself. This lion had a very distinct European design. and the neighboring cross was certainly a Templar cross. There had been a strong Christian presence all through this region.
I had a chance to meet with the deacons at the church and some of the monks and the elders at the church. And we spent a long time talking about the Ark being there. They are totally convinced that the real Ark of the Covenant is in the chapel in Axum.
Cornuke knew it was a distinct honor to meet this council. They control the destiny of the Ark of the Covenant. And after hearing of Cornuke's discovery of Mount Sinai, they invited him to meet with them to discuss their claim and their plans for the future. There was one question, however, that Bob had to have answered.
Are they ever planning to reveal the Ark to the world, or will it remain hidden forever?
This question initiated a reluctant discussion by the committee. After a moment of deliberation, the head priest's answer was very clear and absolute.
So the Ark of the Covenant will be hidden in St. Mary's forever. It will stay here and be guarded.
Cannot be given order or given answer by this committee about the Ark of the Covenant. We will wait as it is. We are not able to change anything from what has been before.
The power of tradition in Ethiopia is very strong, and if a place, a particular part of a church has been roped off and obscured from the eyes of ordinary people for hundreds of years, you can be certain that it's going to continue to be obscured from people's eyes for hundreds of years to come. This is a matter on which the Ethiopians are extremely firm and extremely strict. There's only one man who's allowed to see the Ark of the Covenant, and he is the monk who is appointed as the guardian of the Ark, and they see him as a direct line descendant of the high priest of Jerusalem.
The unique opportunity we had was that we were invited to have a meeting with the guardian of the Ark, and he led us to the gates, and the guardian walked forward and talked to us.
The guardian, the 30th in Axum's history, is the only man in the world allowed to set his eyes on the Ark of the Covenant. Chosen for his absolute purity, his priestly duty is to protect and care for this holy object. Within the confines of this fence, he will spend the rest of his life as the Ark's guardian. He can never leave.
They're not trying to sell themselves as the owners of the Ark of the Covenant to anybody. They don't care if the outside world believes them or not. It's a matter of supreme indifference to them. They know that they have the Ark of the Covenant. They don't need to persuade anybody. There's a calm dignity and surety about these people.
And I was told by one of the priests, who I become friends with, Barani Mescal, he told me that there was an old man who was a chief priest in the area for 50 years, that he actually, on 2 occasions, was allowed into the temple, and his eyes looked upon what he says is the Ark of the Covenant. And we visited this old man at his house, believed to be over 100 years old. This is Kashe Jeves. He was the chief priest here in Axum for many, many years, and considered to be the leading scholar about the Ark of the Covenant here in Axum. Has he ever seen the Ark of the Covenant in St. Mary's of Zion Church?
ንሶም ኣብ ስልጣን ኣብ ዝነበሩሉ ግዜ ይኹን ኣብ ኣክሱም ኣብ ዝነበሩሉ ይኹን ይፈልጥዮም ይዝብል Yes.
Yes, he has.
He has.
Could he show me in size what he believes the Ark of the Covenant, how long it was and how tall it was?
ቁመቱ ክንደይ ይኸውን እዩ ዝብል It is rectangular shape.
It's
but
rectangle.
The length is this one.
It's the length. So it's this long.
This, yeah, like this shape. This
like this.
Yeah.
And he is saying that the ark.
Bob was confused. The ark was described as no larger than a book, not fitting the biblical description at all. But through further discussion, the semantic discrepancy became evident. To the Ethiopians, the Ark of the Covenant is the tablets of the Ten Commandments, and the gold box is only their container.
And is the container made of gold?
Yes, of course.
And what is on top of this gold container?
Yeah. Only in the box there is some shape of angels.
On top of the box there is some type of angels?
Yeah.
And are the angels made of gold?
Yeah, it's gold.
The angels are made of gold?
Yeah.
So you're talking about the Ark of the Covenant is the Ten Commandments according to your traditions and legend.
Yeah.
And these Ten Commandments are the Ark of the Covenant, but they're contained in a bigger gold box with angels on the top of it?
Yes, yes.
And he has seen this big gold box?
All he's seen it, everything.
He has seen everything?
Yeah. And it is unpredictable.
He is afraid of it?
Yeah, unpredictable. When he become near, he become shaking. And it is changeable when you look at it.
It changes when he looks at it,
yeah.
And when he looked at it, he was shaking.
Like this,
he was
like
afraid.
Like
it was like a mirror?
Yeah, changeable.
It changes?
Yeah, he said.
Monks claimed that they possessed more than just the Ark of the Covenant. With the Ark came other implements for worship from Solomon's temple. The monks agreed to show these items and remove them from the temple treasury. This crown was said to be worn by the chief musician, one of 3 musicians who traveled in procession with the Ark.
And then these monks entered the temple treasury and they brought out these hammered silver trumpets, very long trumpets and very ancient trumpets. And we see that in Scripture that it says in Numbers 10, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, make 2 trumpets of hammered silver and use them for calling the community together and for having the camp set out.
These discoveries seem remarkable. But were these trumpets really relics from Old Testament times? Could they be identified as trumpets from Solomon's temple in ancient Israel? An important clue sits nearly 3,000 miles away in Rome, an arch dedicated to the Roman Emperor Titus. In this parade of victory, trumpets are seen, and they are clearly from ancient Israel.
When Titus sacked Jerusalem, he brought these trumpets back and paraded them through the streets of Rome, and a contemporary, an eyewitness that actually saw the trumpets, chiseled these trumpets on the archway in Rome at the Ark of Titus. And these trumpets seem to match perfectly with the trumpets that were brought from the treasury at St. Mary's of Zion.
Let's suppose that there is some firm independent corroboration that the Ark of the Covenant is actually in Ethiopia. What the effects of such a corroboration outside Ethiopia may be remains to be seen.
We can only speculate what the response would be to the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant outside of Israel. I believe that the population at large within Israel, whether religious or non-religious, would consider that to be clearly their property.
Hidden away, out of sight of the world, in the highlands of Ethiopia may just be the best possible place on earth for this object to be. We live in very volatile and troubled times. A return of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem at the moment would have explosive political and religious implications, which could ultimately lead to an attempt to build another temple in Jerusalem, and there are people who would like to do that.
If somehow the Ark of the Covenant were ever to emerge, it would be a tremendous impetus for the construction of the third temple in Jerusalem. That, I think, is the most significant aspect of the Ark of the Covenant. Not saying that that somehow would overcome the fact that the Temple Mount is occupied by 2 mosques of Islam, but it would be a tremendous impetus for the construction of the Third Temple in Jerusalem.
Everybody has a plan for another temple. We have to know how people can come together and work out hostility and anger and misunderstanding and learn how to live together so that a temple can be built.
Such an event would cause chaos in the Middle East if it were to happen. So maybe it's a good thing for the world, just the best thing that could possibly be, if the Ark of the Covenant stays where the Ethiopians say it is, within their control, and there, as they always tell us, by the will of God. Maybe they're right.
The Ark of the Covenant was God's sign and seal of his very presence on the earth. The 10 Commandments contained in the Ark are said to be written by the finger of God himself, and their words challenge us to this very day. Over the years, many have sought to possess the Ark of the Covenant's power, but few have been willing to live by its law. One thing is clear. The Ark of the Covenant's awesome power will remain God's, and God's alone.
It was an amazing journey for me to travel throughout Ethiopia, and for me to think that I was standing just a few feet away from where the Ark of the Covenant may rest today was simply awesome and amazing. But the Bible says that God no longer dwells in temples made by men's hands, but in the hearts of those that would believe in him and trust him. For me, that's the greatest discovery of all.